I'm John Banther, and this is Classical Breakdown. From WETA Classical in Washington, we are your guide to classical music. In this episode, I'm joined by local composer and pianist Sam Post to talk about his new album that features his singular creation, the Well-TAMPERED Clavier Book 1, a rhythmic reimagining of JS Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier. And it will have you hearing Bach and rhythm in a whole new way. Sam gives us the details and intricacies of working with Baroque music in a 21st century way, how he achieved this sound, and we hear how one prelude developed using voice memos from a practice session he made years ago. Plus, I'll let you know what well-tempered even means, and why preludes and fugues in all keys were even written in the first place. Welcome, Sam Post. It's great to have you here because we've been communicating for several years, and I've been airing some of your performances on Front Row Washington. I just recorded one yesterday, actually. But this is the first time we've met, so it's nice to put, I already saw your face in a picture, but it's nice to meet you finally after all of these years.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward.
So your new album with Ralitsa Pacheva, that is out now, and this work of yours, it's the entire recording. And she's also a local and phenomenal pianist. And you two seem like two peas in a pod when I hear you play in this or in other music. And it sounds like maybe you both had the same teacher as well.
We did, yeah. We met quite a long time ago when I was growing up. I studied with the same teacher that Ralitsa had studied with, and that's how we reconnected later on as well.
So there's always some kind of kindred or, some kind of camaraderie, even if it's, not at the same time. When you study with the same teacher, you've probably heard the same things 1,000 times from that teacher. So before we talk about your, well-tampered clavier, we need to understand a little bit about JS Bach's well-tempered clavier music from 1722, because while many of us, we've heard this in some way or even played it, we've not all thought about what well-tempered actually means. So what does that mean, and why would it be interesting enough to make Bach write music in all of the major and minor keys? So I'm going to give a brief idea of tuning systems, and of course, Sam, feel free to jump in and correct me, because when I was in school, I couldn't care less about this topic. I play a wind instrument, I don't care. I'm playing in tune how I play in tune. I don't have to worry about the whole keyboard thing. So even as late as the 19th century, tuning a piano wasn't like it is today with what we call equal temperament, where each of the 12 notes on the piano, they're tuned an equal distance apart from each other, and this makes all keys basically sound the same. They are all equally out of tune, just a little bit, and for us, we find that, we're used to it and it's pleasing to our ears. So if each note on the piano is a stepping stone, every stone is the same distance. And this came into practice in the end of the 19th century, I think, kind of late.
And I think what people don't realize is the reason that all the notes have to be a little bit out of tune is because there's this fundamental conflict between these two pure intervals, the octave and the fifth, where 12 fifths is very, very close to 7 octaves, but they don't match 100%. And people have realized this since the days of Pythagoras, ancient Greece, and so they've had to kind of work compromises into how this 12-tone system works in order to accommodate that fundamental conflict.
That's the thing. This goes back to Pythagoras. There's a bunch of math and science. And so actually, let's hear now a chord progression in equal temperament. This will sound just like you'd expect, except it's a MIDI piano, but it'll sound like you expect. So that sounds, as I expected. Everything sounds the same. They all have the same quality to them. Now, a popular tuning system for the keyboard before Bach's time was just temperament. And this is where you focus in on a particular key, like C major, and you tune the keyboard so it sounds perfect in C major. It sounds very pure. Those intervals you were talking about, they are perfect. There's no beats in the sound. But what this means is as you move further away from that key you tuned, C major, it can sound worse and worse. And so as we heard, Sam, the first chord is perfect, but then it goes off the rails. Have you ever had to play on an instrument tuned this way?
I have not. But I have played on many instruments tuned in equal temperament very poorly, so or out of tune.
Yeah, that's the thing. My piano sounds like it's just temperament at home too, because it's not. It needs to be tuned. But other temperaments started to flourish in the 17th and 18th centuries to address this. One particular well-tempered system that Bach used was Werkmeister 3. Don't worry about the name; it doesn't matter. But in this well-tempered system, you can play in all of the keys. It was practical, but they didn't all sound exactly the same, and that's because the notes are still not the exact same distance from each other like the equal temperament, so those stepping stones, the distance can vary. But what this system allowed you to do, it was an improvement because it lets you play in all of the major and minor keys and do so, well, in a way that doesn't sound terrible. And then it also gave the keys a little bit of character and color as well. So here's that same chord progression with this well-tempered system.
I think a lot of people sometimes may be confused. I know I was when I was a kid when people talked about different keys having different flavors and different qualities because we're so used to equal temperament now. And obviously, as you just explained, that's one of the reasons. But I want to add also to that on the modern piano, even with equal temperament, the difference in the mechanical nature of the black notes and the white notes is what gives, to me at least, different keys, different characters, even with equal temperament. And that's something that I think people can probably hear even if they don't realize that they're hearing that difference. It was kind of a revelation for me when I realized I could kind of hear the difference between the black and the white notes. And yeah, it's just kind of a random piano thing.
And that's something that is also of its time and place because these notes don't sound the same as they did 100, 200 years ago when we were even lower. And so, there's a really interesting idea with how keys, even, with the orchestra and equal-tempered pianos, there's still a character that can be found. So that last one we heard was the Werkmeister 3. A little thing sounded a little wonky, but it was practical. It worked. So now that we got through the most boring part of school, that I couldn't care less about, when I was in school, now we need to hear about what does well-tampered mean in this case for you.
First of all, the name Well-Tampered was the invention of my colleague Ralitza when we were starting out with this album. But what we've done in this music is, or what I've done with these arrangements is try to take a much more flexible and new approach to rhythm and timing. So it's a bit more modern and I think fits the piano better and throws in a lot of syncopation and different dance rhythms that didn't exist in Bach's day. And in a lot of cases, what we end up with is something more lively and more exciting and more bite to the sound, as opposed to kind of the delicateness of what you would hear on the harpsichord. And we'll get into that, I think, a little bit later as well. And then in other cases, what I ended up with was something more intimate and maybe more lyrical, kind of embracing the other side of how the piano is different from the harpsichord. It really kind of led me down a lot of different paths, taking this more flexible, more free approach, more improvisatory with the rhythm in Bach's music, kind of taking the cue from what I've learned and experienced in modern music of all sorts of styles.
So this is something that really is a product of the 20th and 21st centuries, not just maybe the rhythms that we now use and embrace from, all over the world, and especially Africa and South America. Now that we have that, we can approach things, I guess, a little bit differently. So how Bach was really experimental with showing you these different keys, you are doing the same thing with rhythm.
Exactly, yeah.
Like, yeah.
And I should add what I wanted to do, to me, the best and most amazing things about Bach are, the counterpoint and the harmony. And those I haven't really messed with at all. I've tried to leave them intact. And the rhythm in Bach is great as well in its own way. And he, I think, was in many ways a lot more interesting rhythmically than a lot of his contemporaries. But obviously with this kind of expanded rhythmic palette that we have that you mentioned, knowing so much more music today than he did and having different instruments today than he did in his time, kind of, my mind started to call out for those rhythms in his music as well. And once I started to experiment with that, it kind of gave me this freedom that, there was a lot of fun and that like I said, it led me to lots of different places that were unexpected and exciting.
A lot of people have played and recorded this, the famous ones, of course, like Glenn Gould, who I don't know how he plays Bach. I don't really know what he's doing, but the way he makes all these textures and things come out is so special. Is there something like that with you and the rhythm as well and how you're approaching it?
So I would say, Glenn Gould had a very different approach to Bach than pianists and certainly other keyboardists before him. And to me, people like to say that he made the piano sound like a harpsichord, but I kind of disagree, and I think he really embraced the percussive and biting nature of the piano sound and the articulation, which to me relates a little bit more to 20th century jazz pianists and like how they would get a really biting syncopation sound. And it's that approach that was really influential to me in making these new rhythms, because I think once you have that bite in the sound, it works even better once you throw in the different rhythms and add syncopations, and that really embraces the nature of 20th, 21st century piano. So it's kind of like taking Glenn Gould a step further.
The articulation and how you can make a piano sound differently, I think, is super important, because as pointillistic as a harpsichord is, which is what I think also makes this type of music work, you can achieve that on the piano. And as you were talking about, or jazz or ragtime, thinking about Art Tatum. Like, what would happen if Art Tatum played a harpsichord? Would it just catch on fire or something? But then I thought about it a little more. Harpsichords are actually, they were pretty fast action as well. But he has an articulation on the piano in a club that is like, what are you doing? How is this even possible to play at that speed with that, super precise sound?
Yeah. And so, I love Art Tatum, and I've listened to a lot of Thelonious Monk, and Wynton Kelly is another jazz pianist who I really love. So people like that who, they really gave the piano a different sound that, along with Glenn Gould, was a huge influence on me, and has been a huge influence on me in terms of my playing and how I listen and how I experience rhythm and music generally.
So let's look at how this process actually unfolds, because we've heard a little bit of an example and comparison of the first prelude, which, I mean, even I had to play in school at one point, and then your version, which is, rhythmically quite different. We can look at another prelude of yours to really hammer this down, because you brought in some voice memos as well of you practicing and working this out. And that's another thing. When musicians die, we have like thousands of hours probably collectively of these voice memos and videos of us practicing. But anyway, you have the prelude number 5, and you brought some of these voice memos of how it was, some of the earlier versions. So maybe using this one, talk to us about the evolution of this. Where do you go from playing Bach's original to what you came up with at the end?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people will know this prelude, the D major prelude. It's very fast, very virtuosic, very brilliant sound. And that's how I have played the original version as well. And I think, like the C major, what I started with, my initial idea was basically to create syncopations by removing a note here, removing a note there, and then you can have a note extending through the beat that kind of catches you right before the beat instead of on the beat. And I thought that was a pretty cool idea. But I was just messing around with it, and the next idea, I don't even know how it came, but this piece has basically, you can think of it as 4 subdivisions of the measure. And what I did was just expand that into 6 subdivisions instead. So basically expanding the timing instead of keeping the beat the same. And what that did was create extra space to allow the music to breathe a little more, but also extra space to exploit by extending some notes, making some notes longer, instead of the original version where all the right-hand notes are basically the same until you get to the very end. They're all 16th notes, steady 16th notes through the entire thing. Basically, it allows a little extra space for those notes to be longer, and you can throw in syncopations in different places, but in kind of a subtle way that gives it, I think, a more singing, more intimate, delicate quality. Although, as you'll hear in the voice memo, it started out kind of swift and fast, even in that version as well.
So as we're talking about this, people are going to hear some contrasts of like the original Bach and then yours, which will have a strong rhythmic difference. We can look now at those voice memos that you sent that show us, the path that this took. So if we listen to a little bit of what you sent me was draft 1. So here we're still quite fast and virtuosic, and we've got a bit of the syncopation as well popping out. But you weren't totally satisfied, I guess, with where it was in this case.
Yeah, I don't know. I was in the stage of trying out lots of different things and experimenting. So I actually think I liked that version, but I played the other version for a couple other people, and they were like, no, that's the one. Yeah. Yeah, I think deep down I knew in this case that they were right. I mean, the one that you just heard, it's very similar, obviously, to the C major in that it's basically, just creating those syncopations, but keeping this kind of upbeat and lively character.
So was figuring this out a process of just kind of noodling around? Because back when I used to use a piano a lot for warming up and everything, it's like 7 in the morning, I'm tired. I'm just like playing notes and just just messing around, making stuff up. I'd even like just make up a little tune and I might play it or something. But is it kind of that you really have to just sit and experiment and play around with it?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of improvising, experimenting, just trying to come up with something cool and fun, and then going back and making sure that there's coherence and a narrative sense that runs through that it's not just something kind of spontaneous and fun, but that it makes sense musically as well. And so in some of the pieces, the C major, there's no change in the beat, just change in the rhythm. And then in ones like this, the D major prelude, there's an expansion of the beat and an expansion of the rhythm. And then in many of the others, there's actually a contraction of the beat and a kind of a narrowing of the time that adds an element of surprise and kind of like a little bit of a jump syncopation that you might associate more with Bartók or Stravinsky, or it kind of lends a little bit of a swing element. And a couple of those that work like that would be like the F sharp minor prelude or the E minor fugue, where it's actually just removing the beats that gives this little sense of unevenness. And then you don't know sometimes when it's going to be a syncopation or when it's going to be like, oh, nope, that's the new beat. And I think those 3 elements kind of guided me through the process.
And that is what really stuck out to me, and how some of these things are broadened, which is maybe less noticeable, but the ones that are contracted to where it feels like there's something suddenly like you're in 4/4 or 2/8, and then there's a 3/16 bar,
Exactly,
like Stravinsky, and then you continue. So it feels like you're almost like a cubist painting at times. But let's hear. I don't want us to miss this second draft that you also sent me of the D major prelude.
Love that piano.
So we should remember also, these are practice files. These are, practicing on the piano. It's not a Steinway that's tuned every week or something before.
I don't know what temperament that one is, but
we talked all about the temperament and tuning, and then we've not mentioned anything about the tuning of this piano. But that's practicing.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to see that it is part of like an organic process of noodling around and experimenting, but that also, letting some of the music speak for itself or find itself. Because in a way, it also sounds like these are paintings where, the painter has to decide when it's done. You can always keep moving and doing little adjustments or adding this and that. But with this, if you do too much, maybe like a house of cards, it falls down. The original foundation is gone.
I would say that is kind of the one of the major dilemmas of my life here is deciding when something is done and when I would say a lot of these pieces actually I went too far and then had to come back. And even for if I may admit, some of them I've even kind of changed since the recording. I would say it's an ongoing process even now. But certainly I think, yeah, that at a certain point you have to say, these are good, this is done, and this is how we're going with it, which is a difficult thing to do as just as an artist and musician, especially in the age of recording.
Yes. I mean, with publications, yeah, you publish something, but then maybe you go on tours and you play it. I've had stuff that I had to play from memory, and then years later I looked at the music. I was like, wow, I play it totally different than what this person was actually saying. So how long was this process from start to finish? Was it like an intentional, I'm starting this project, or was it just kind of a slow thing you just did and then suddenly it came together?
Yeah, so what actually happened, how it came about, I wrote a couple pieces of my own, which actually I think you've heard, the Syncopated Suite, which I wrote and Bralitza performed. And this was a kind of Baroque style piece with syncopations and with different rhythms, but not based on Bach's writing. But then after that, I thought, oh, well, maybe if I play a Bach suite and kind of take the same approach, like I wonder what would happen with that. So I kind of started changing the rhythm in the Bach suites on the repeats to start with. That was kind of the start of this process. And then I thought, well, if I can do it on a Bach suite, why not try it with the preludes and fugues? So the first time I did that was in, I think, early 2021 or maybe over the summer. And then, my partner, now my wife, pointed out to me that the tricentennial of the Well-TAMPERED Clavier was coming up the very next year.
2022.
Exactly, 2022, or of book one, I should say. And so I thought, oh, well, I could do them all. And it took a little longer than I was anticipating. Didn't quite get it done in 2022 because, it was a lot of work. And, my original thought was to do it myself. But I realized that, in bringing Bralitza into the project, which I was, absolutely delighted when I played these for her and she said, she would agree to do it with me. Her playing really, in the process of doing the arrangements, really changed how I thought not only about the ones that she played. It just always, hearing her play, like, changes my perspective, often very subtle and often very kind of big ways, because she really put such dedication into even, these things that I put in front of her and that I showed to her as my arrangements, but then she really takes them off in a different direction than I could have imagined. And it's always, like, totally brilliant, and it just kind of broadens, again, like, the ideas that come to me and how I think about it. And so it's really an essential part of the project was having her play half of them.
Yeah, let's talk about that because she was involved. She plays half of them. You can tell us also how you maybe split them up. It's not always alternating.
It's not alternating.
Yeah, it's not alternating, but she's a phenomenal pianist, local in the area, that also appears on Front Row Washington from time to time. So you're giving her the music, and then I assume she's taking it home, and then or maybe just playing it for you right there. And maybe what's also interesting is that you have the same teacher, so in some sense you're also both coming from a similar point of view, or you have a similar point of view or background on that. And it sounds like you give her this, she plays it, and then hearing someone else play it back to you in that way informs you of
so a lot of them, like, went through a further evolution after Bralitza would make some suggestions, some changes, and in some instances she would even have a completely different idea for the beginning, like how to basically kind of just restart the canvas, to use your painting analogy. And that happened especially with the E minor prelude and the C sharp major preludes, I should say. And the E minor prelude, I think, is one of the the best of the bunch, especially in how it turned out in her playing. That was one where I hadn't planned on changing the beat, and she had the idea of expanding the beat in a similar way that you heard in the D major, although in most measures it turns out that it's kind of something in between 5 and 5.5 beats. It's like not even entirely clear. And it has a little bit of a kind of Latin, almost salsa feel to it. And so she was like, what if we did the first measure like this? And then I took that and I was like, that's brilliant. Yes, we're doing that. And then I went back and rewrote the whole thing. And so it's things like that Yeah, and I guess the other thing I would add about her playing is even though, you mentioned we have the same teacher, maybe we have the same approach. I would say our teacher was so good at drawing out like our individual
Mm,
sound and character.
yeah.
I think a lot of people will notice and maybe be surprised at how different we sound on these different pieces. To be a little self-deprecating, I would say Rollitz's sound is so refined and can be so delicate and beautiful, whereas mine tend more toward the percussive and are, like leaning into the syncopation articulation element. Yeah, I just think like having those two approaches balance each other. I think really lends the recording like an extra element that it wouldn't have had if either of us had done it on our own.
This feels like a project where it only improves when you have a second person like this.
Definitely, yeah.
Because this isn't like, some random piece of music you found. This is music pretty much every pianist knows it. She probably has it memorized, and you as well, much of the actual original. And so giving it to someone who, also plays the same instrument, has such a deep understanding of the music, it offers up those opportunities of someone else having an equally great or even better idea of, oh, hey, actually, what if we do this here? Because they're hearing the music in a whole new way for the first time as well.
Yeah, definitely.
The E minor one, that's the Latin one you were talking about?
Yes, the E minor prelude.
I wanted to ask about that because you hear this Latin rhythm, and I was wondering if there are any names we can put to some of these rhythms, or if it's more of gestural, if you know what I mean, like a cumbia or something.
I am not sure exactly because I don't know the lexicon well enough. It's more that, I've heard this rhythm in this dance and I've heard this
Yeah.
one in this dance, but I don't know the names of them well enough to say, well, that's a salsa or that's a,
Yeah.
a
One of my favorites is actually number 7, the fugue in E flat major, because besides the opening few notes, it really sounds like Bach. Like this sounds like, for some reason, it sounds like more Bach-like than the original for some reason. Some of the notes that are brought out in a way, I don't know. I just wanted to mention that one is fascinating because it seems like a contrast that doesn't have the Latin aspect, or maybe I'm missing it. But if you had that in the background, someone might say, in a room, oh, what Bach is that? And then you listen closely, like, what is happening? What's happening here? But I really like number 7 in E flat.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that that was one of the first ones that I played myself, and I think the recording turned out great, the fugue, and it's just such a fun, exciting. I think the original has this kind of jazzy little element to it that I think maybe you're picking up on that I tried to enhance and emphasize even more in the rhythmically redone version.
It's kind of surprising that you're altering the rhythms, or giving some space by having one thing hang out longer, and yet this doesn't totally mess up some of the harmony or the counterpoint in a way. Is it like a puzzle where you move something and you realize, oh, you know what, that doesn't work because it moves this block over, by too much? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it has to be an intuitive, organic process, of course, where I wasn't trying to be overly calculating or I wasn't trying to be calculating really at all in terms of how to move the notes from side to side in time, but just being sensitive to not overdoing it in this way or in that way, and letting intuition be the guide, but then obviously going back and refining when it sounds a little off, like maybe this beat has been emphasized too much or in too many kind of subsequent measures in a row, and then going back and maybe filling in that space and emphasizing another beat, so that hopefully what you get is something that sounds spontaneous a little bit, but a natural flow, and hopefully, very beautiful and intimate and delicate in this case as well.
Okay, and I have plenty more questions for you, and we'll get into those right after this. Okay, Sam, I'm wondering, what were some of the most challenging aspects or perhaps time-consuming aspects of this project for you? We've already mentioned, like a painting, you have to know when to stop, but was there something else that we may not, think of that was quite a challenge?
Well, I would say in this case, just the sheer amount of music involved was a big challenge. I mean, it's basically 24 two-part pieces, so 48 pieces in all. I wrote down all the ones for Rolita. I wrote them out, and then she had to learn them. And I think even though she knows the originals very well, I think she'll tell you that your memories of the original kind of conflicts when you're trying to like do this slightly differently, and that adds an extra challenge too. And I think by then I was already in this mode of, okay, this is how this music is going to go now in my head.
Mm-hmm.
So the adjustment wasn't quite as what's the word I'm looking for?
Like jarring.
Yeah, the adjustment wasn't quite as jarring for me because I had already kind of initiated that mental adjustment. Whereas for her, she tells me she was going back and forth between the originals and the modified versions, and we even tried to perform them that way a little bit back to back, and that was really hard even for me. So yeah, trying to go back and forth in the mode of thinking, was a big challenge.
That's actually one of my biggest questions, or one of them is, do you have to put yourself in the right headspace or a different frame of mind for each one? Like if you're playing the original and then maybe you get distracted and think for a second about the updated one and you're playing from memory, you might have a problem. Or for me as a brass player, when I play Bach, like some of the solo flute partitas, it's a string of 16th notes from beginning to end. That's it, and you have to add all these breaths and stuff. But it feels like you are like a diver on the ocean surface, and then it's like, okay, you take the breath and you plunge down to the bottom to do your work.
Yeah.
You're in a totally different headspace. So how is that? You're definitely not going back and forth. I understand that.
Yeah, I would say that difficulty really like comes to bear, especially in the fugues, because you are trying to keep track of 3, 4, 5 voices, and in those cases, you really do have to be, I would say, like you said, in the right headspace and in a slightly different headspace, because in the Bach versions, there's an order and there's kind of an absoluteness to the order of the rhythm, that I think a lot of us appreciate and is great about Bach, because it has this logic to it. And in these ones, that logic is slightly perturbed in a way, obviously, that I hope makes its own sense, but it does upset this kind of absolute, like, beautiful order of the originals, and that, it's different.
Yeah, I can imagine with the fugue, because some of these are it's like dominoes. You tip one and it's off, and you got to run and keep up.
Right. On that note, I mean, a lot of the times in the revisions or in making these drafts, I would have my version maybe that I had already kind of rhythmically redone, and then I would go back and, like you said, making one change toward the beginning would kind of set off a cascade of like, well, okay, if I do that, well, that kind of makes this other thing want to happen a little bit differently, and then that wants to change this, and then it can kind of get a little expand the footprint of that one change, so to say.
And it sounds like, for a lot of us play Bach that, Bach didn't even know our instruments. And, I have to breathe when I play. And your breath, where you breathe right here, it's going to affect how you really should be breathing later on. And the breathing has to be in as part of the music itself. I'm also wondering.
I would say, even though, we don't have to breathe in the same way.
Yeah.
As pianists, we want the music to breathe, obviously, and it's a little different because it can be voice by voice, and obviously, with the two hands it's different, but the music should have that same sense of breathing. And just like you said, when you breathe here, it kind of it takes you to a different place, for your next breath, potentially.
A lot of this music that Bach was writing, like in the 1700s, there's not a lot of direction in terms of even tempo or dynamics, articulation, anything like that. Did you write in dynamics or like accents and stuff like that?
Good question. You mean in the written versions?
Yeah, in the written versions.
So it's a lot of right. So I haven't finalized. I have to admit the written versions. I've sent all the ones that Rolita played. She has taken, and how to answer that question?
So the recording is finalized, but
of course, the recording is finalized. So just talking about the written versions, it's kind of an open question. I don't know,
Hmm.
and it kind of brings me back to the idea that I think a lot of people look at classical music, a lot of what we play, Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms, and they see the written directions as a bit constraining.
Hmm.
Um, and in Bach, there's this freedom because you don't have a lot of those written directions. And it's not like the music doesn't have a logic and it shouldn't necessarily, it can't be played in all different ways, but there is a freedom and a creativity that comes with that lack of direction. And as a composer, I would echo that in saying, when I handed these pieces off to Ralitza, like I said, a lot of the time, if I didn't write in certain directions, she would do something that I didn't expect and that was brilliant nonetheless. And so it's always a trade-off and a cautionary kind of thing for a composer. If you put in something, are you kind of cutting off the discretion, the freedom, and the creativity of whoever you're handing that music off to, and kind of preventing them from doing it their own way, for better or for worse sometimes. In Rollitz's case, usually for better.
So in the collaboration process, yeah, it definitely makes sense to you're just sending them the music without those extra directions, and then yeah, she does something that totally surprises you. So it sounds like yeah, this isn't published yet where people can actually buy it. And it sounds like you're going to write some things in, but you will still, when it is published, you still want to have that flexibility in a sense.
Yeah, and going further on that thought, obviously, if people want to know how I want to do it, they have the recording as a reference, which obviously in Beethoven's time, there were no recordings. So if he wanted, if he had a certain vision, he had to put it into the written music, which these days we don't have that particular constraint. So if people, if they want to know exactly what I think, well, they can listen to what I think. Yeah.
Has this changed how you approach rhythm in your other compositions since you started this 4 years ago?
I would say rhythm for me, it's an ongoing project, and it's always my thinking, my how I treat rhythm, how I think about rhythm is always evolving. And I guess that's a little bit of a cop-out answer. So ever since I started thinking about syncopation in rhythm as a composer, like that really changed the trajectory of all the music that I've written. And I just think, anytime I hear a new style, a new composer, a new something that I like, it's I'm trying to like kind of put that into the brain and see kind of what comes out from that. So it's always a moving target and always something to learn and develop more. Yeah.
I mean, when it comes to music, and this is all music on this planet, well, maybe not all music, I guess, but for the most part, I mean, rhythm is king. If you can't play in time, you're not getting the job.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't have the greatest sound, and depending on some instruments, that becomes less of an issue. If you can play in time and someone else has a much better sound and they can't play in time, yeah, the person who can't play in time is not getting the job.
Yeah.
Period. You will get called back if you can play in time, but if you don't have that and that really deep sense of rhythm, you run into problems.
Yeah, I agree. Rhythm is king.
Okay, so when is book 2 coming?
So interesting that you should bring that up, actually, because what I would say about that is this. Bach actually went through his own rhythmic evolution in his own composing. And I haven't looked at book 2, obviously, as closely as book 1, but the pieces in book 2 are already a bit more rhythmically sophisticated than book 1.
Does it come out much later? How much later is book 1 for him? 1722 to...
I'm actually not sure, but I think it's quite a bit later. It's about 20 years, if something like that. It's a bit later. And so it actually would be much harder to do for book 2. And I'm not sure it would have the same success. But as I mentioned, I love doing this, and how it actually started was with the suites. And I love doing it as well with Goldberg variations. So that would probably be my choice, the suites and Goldberg variations for the next project.
Wow. Yeah, I just looked it up. It was, you're right, it was 22 years, 1744, which is now getting towards the later part of his life and some of his really interesting stuff with fugues and...
Right, I would say the art of fugue, I would also be, if I could say one thing of Bach's maybe is untouchable, and I know maybe I'll take that back if I want to mess with it later, but art of fugue, like can't be, I don't know. Yeah, there's something about art of fugue that just because of the complexity, but also, like I said, I think Bach really did evolve rhythmically in his own time. It would be hard to do anything with that.
Well, are we missing anything about this? Is there anything about this music that we've not talked about or that you think people should maybe know or explore afterwards after they hear this recording?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think what I would want is that, the recording changes how people think about Bach and the piano, because, and especially for people who play the piano or know or listen regularly to piano music and Bach on the piano, there is this a little bit of a like dilemma that teachers will tell you about Bach, which is, are you going to try to play it, quote unquote, historically like the original? And in many instances, people say that should manifest as trying to make the piano sound like a harpsichord. Or are you going to play it and embrace the romantic piano sound of the 19th century, which is more melodic and more lyrical? And for me, this recording and this project and this approach gives a third way, which is to embrace the 20th century element of the piano with, as we mentioned already, jazz articulation, swing rhythm, things like that, and a more percussive element that doesn't really emerge from either of the first two approaches. So, I think there's this illusion that you can play Bach on the piano historically, because obviously the piano did not exist in Bach's time. Whenever you play Bach on the piano, you have to change things. It's already changed, and it's just a matter of, well, are you gonna embrace that change and make something musical and something that fits the music and that makes artistic sense, or are you gonna do something weird or something that doesn't make artistic sense? And hopefully, this recording will convince you that this approach, although it's different from anything before, it makes artistic sense, and it kind of provides hopefully a path toward making Bach a more living art, a more living composer, and kind of as well hopefully make you see the originals in a little bit of a different light, because I think after people who know this music really well, like you're used to hearing it the same way so much that it kind of gets into a little bit of a rut of listening, I would say.
Yeah.
And this will hopefully open your eyes. And even if you go back and listen to the originals, you'll hear the rhythm a little bit more alive than you did before.
Yeah. I mean, this only enhances it, I think. And people people fight over, especially Bach, all the time how it should be played. And sometimes people surprise you. I remember for my last recital in for my master's, I was playing a Bach partita, and my teacher was like, look, so-and-so, it was like a very famous Bach scholar in the city, they ended up being assigned to your recital, they sign off, they give you notes and, pass, fail, do you get your degree or not? He's like, look, don't worry about it, but he's not going to like this. He's not going to like it, just ignore what if he says anything, just ignore it. In the end, that guy didn't care at all, I think. He didn't say anything about that, so he said, it's fine. So people will surprise you, and we want Bach in the 21st century, things are going to change. That's the only constant.
I think so, yeah.
Well, thank you, Sam, so much for coming in and telling us all about this. And I hope, all of us are going to listen to this and hear Bach's music and other things in a whole new way.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Classical Breakdown, your guide to classical music. For more information on this episode, visit the show notes page at classicalbreakdown.org. You can send me comments and episode ideas to classicalbreakdown@weta.org. And if you enjoyed this episode, leave a review in your podcast app. I'm John Panther. Thanks for listening to Classical Breakdown from WETA Classical.